everyone. Welcome to the June 19th edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I am David Aragona here with my usual co-host Craig Milkowski as we recap some racing from last week around the country. I think we're going to start by focusing on some of the races that we discussed on the forecast last week. We handicapped that cross-country Pick 5 sequence, which featured racing from both Monmouth Park and Belmont at the Big A. Craig had some decent opinions throughout that sequence, not so much for me, but there were some circumstances that I think caused that payout to be a little bit lower than some people were expecting. We'll talk about that when we get to it, but we will dissect that stakes action that did take place at Monmouth, those 4 stakes races on Saturday, as well as one of the stakes from the Sunday card. We'll move on to Belmont at the Big A. The big race there that was part of that cross-country Pick 5 was the Grade 2 Bed of Roses. We'll talk about trips in that race, some other racing from Belmont at the Big A. Then we'll move on to California, Santa Anita. There was a graded stakes race there last weekend. We'll also mention some notable speed figures in maiden and allowance races. And then we'll finish things up at Churchill Downs, Hawthorne, and Laurel to close out the show. Craig, I thought that it was a fun day of racing at Monmouth. Some really interesting races to talk about from a trip standpoint. Some somewhat surprising winners, maybe in the way that they accomplished their victories. And I think we saw some decent performances for the divisions moving forward.
Yeah, with some good races for what looked like one of the slower weeks going in. Not a whole lot of graded stakes action, not too many grade 1s, but we saw some solid speed figures for sure and some good performances.
Well, let's dive right into our race recap of Monmouth Park in New Jersey from last week. I'll share my screen of the TimeformUS chart for the first race that we're going to talk about, the Grade 3 Salvatore Mile. That was the final leg of the sequence we discussed last week, the final race of the day at Monmouth Park on Saturday. And Craig, this was a strange one to watch because Bright Future, who expectedly took all the money, getting bet down to even money in here, looked like the horse to beat on the way in. Didn't necessarily travel like the horse to beat during the race. Actually seemed like he might not even have a shot to hit the board coming around the far turn. But as soon as they turned into the stretch, he somehow found another gear and quickly put this race to bed.
Yeah, it was really a weirdly run race, as you say. He was pretty much on the rail through the stretch, getting up that way. I mean, he was much the best in here. He didn't get much of a speed figure, only 115 on TimeformUS scale. He had a 120 final time that was knocked down by the slow pace. And I think in his case, maybe it held back that speed figure a little bit, as I think he was just, there wasn't enough pace in here for him to really run a fast race. He's not the kind of horse to go out and set it himself, especially at the mile distance. So a good return effort for him, and I would expect better next out.
Yeah, you could see the part of this trip that we were discussing just here. I mean, he's kind of like hitting the brakes around the far turn. I think Javier Castellano had to ride him a little tentatively, as it seemed like the horse in front of him, the number 5 Oscar Eclipse, was sort of about to come back in his face. And I think Bright Future might have overreacted to that horse's slowing of momentum, and he just took himself out of the race at about the 3/8 pole. But you could see here, as soon as that horse in front of him drifts off the rail and he sees that daylight ahead of him, this horse just picks up his stride, responds to that right-hand whip from Javier Castellano, and shoots away from this field late. And Craig, this is a pretty impressive late run because there wasn't a whole lot of pace in this race. And you could kind of see when we show the TimeformUS pace figure line for him, as we go back to the chart here. I mean, you don't often see a line like this in a dirt race where a horse is running pace figures in the low 100s and is able to accelerate enough to earn a 120 final time fig. Obviously, that knocked down a little bit due to the TimeformUS algorithm taking some points off for slow paces on the dirt, but no doubt Bright Future was much the best in this race.
Yeah, and it's a race we didn't use the P notation to bump up because of the rest of the field. They basically ran kind of what we would have expected from them, despite the slow pace. So I didn't want to artificially upgrade all of the others. I try to save that for races where the bulk of the field you would have expected to run faster, and that really wasn't the case here. But as I said earlier, I would expect him to run faster, and I think it was an impressive return and probably exactly what Todd Pletcher was looking for.
Yeah, I'm assuming we're going to see him move on to some higher graded stakes next time, probably going slightly longer distances. Well, let's stick with the Todd Pletcher theme and talk about another one of his winners on Saturday at Monmouth in the Pegasus Stakes. This the local prep for the Haskell, and maybe we have an actual Haskell contender in the winner here, Tuscan Sky, Craig, a horse that neither of us were too high on coming into this race, but I don't think either of us expected to get him to get as advantageous a trip as he ultimately did. This was another strangely run race for different reasons. I mean, multiple horses going out for the front end, 5 across the track around the clubhouse turn, and Tuscan Sky took the shortest way around, and that proved to be the best path.
Yeah, he was a dominant winner, obviously. Anytime you win by more than 6 lengths, it was impressive. And he did it with a very nice speed figure as well, a 122, which puts him right in there with some of the best 3-year-olds. Now, this wasn't a field of the best 3-year-olds. It was kind of a second tier field, but he did everything you could want from him. It's not like he didn't face any pressure. He had to work to get to the front. And once he got there, just nobody was in his class, really. And he proved he's probably one of the better 3-year-olds that we've seen this year. Now, he needs to do it against better company, but, maybe he can. He didn't perform very well the first time he was given that opportunity. But I would expect we're going to see a good race from him next time.
I still have some minor concerns about this horse, Craig, because he was fortunate through the early stages of this race, and we're watching it right here. I mean, they just left the rail open for Javier on this horse, as I think it was Paco Lopez on one of them, who was drifting rivals out into the clubhouse turn. I think maybe it was Jairo Rendon on another one of those horses. I mean, but they just pushed Domestic Product and C Streak way out into the center of the racetrack around that first turn. And Tuscan Sky was actually outrun by those horses through the first quarter, but being able to cut the corner and have that wide path down towards the inside open to him, he was able to shoot on through. And now by this point, as they're reaching the second turn, he's just traveling less ground than the others, and Domestic Product and C Streak are trying to go after him at this point in the race. But this is a horse that is able to sustain his top speed when he's able to hit it. And we've seen Tuscan Sky as a horse that really does appreciate being able to run his own race freely without horses in front of him. He really seemed to resent the kickback and racing behind horses in the Wood Memorial, and he just never had to deal with any of that in this race, Craig. I still have some concerns about whether or not he'd be able to get this forwardly placed trip in a race that features other speed that maybe isn't underestimating him. So I'm a little bit concerned about him repeating this kind of number in the Haskell, but as you said, no doubt about it, he was much the best on this day. And I think we got some answers about the horses that finished behind him. Domestic Product, he is capable of running a faster speed figure. He did so here, but he's still not one of the better 3-year-olds in this class. Even the best that he was able to do wasn't quite good enough to get within range of Tuscan Sky. And I think even when you account for some of the ground lost on Domestic Product, he probably was still finishing second in this race. And the others, Craig, they were just kind of disappointing. I can be done with Hades now. Yeah, he was a little bit wide like the others, but once again, he's just not running back to those early season performances.
Yeah, I mean, he ran okay, but I think both of the second and third place finishers, as you know, they're just not that fast. Sure, maybe they had a little bit of wide trips in here and it wasn't ideal, but they would still need to take another huge step forward. I guess if you wanted to give an excuse to somebody, it could be C Streak, who just, I don't know what was going on with that ride. Seemed like he was a horse who probably could have tucked in behind those dueling horses, but he still ran okay, ran to his prior speed figures, and probably could have run a better number, but still would have been no threat to the winner.
Yeah, and I think I misspoke. That was Jairo Rendon on C Streak. It was Joe Bravo on Willie D's, who was also drifting some of those horses out heading into the clubhouse turn. So strangely run race, but no doubt about who was best. Once again, another Todd Pletcher trainee. Let's move on to some of those turf stakes that took place during this sequence on Saturday at Monmouth Park. The 11th was the Grade 3 Monmouth Stakes, and this was one of several photo finishes on Saturday at Monmouth Park, Craig. And not just photo finishes, but races that were really decided by millimeters or inches. And this one, it was impossible for the placing judges to separate the top two, as it was one of 2 dead heats that took place on this Monmouth card. And actually one of 2 dead heats that was part of this late pick 5 sequence at Monmouth, if you played that Monmouth focus sequence. Here, Craig, Fort Washington and Running B had to share the victory, and unfortunately for the bettors, there was a big disparity in price between these two horses.
Yeah, if you played the pick five, it's kind of ridiculous that at this point we're still paying the same price for two horses that were vastly different prices. We don't do this in any of the other pools. Like if you get a dead heat and a win, you don't get the same price on the horses. It's just something I could calculate if I had the pool size and the takeout in about, I don't know, 90 seconds. I could figure out the fair payoffs. The fact that the tote's not doing it at this point is just, it's ridiculous and it's lazy and it should be fixed. But I don't have any hope that it will be because it's been this way for a long time and people have known about it. So I guess it's just one of those risks you have to take if you play a long horse, if a long shot, that if you dead heat, you're going to take the short of it. Luckily, it doesn't happen too often. As for the race, the top two ran fine. I mean, there was it looked like a fairly evenly matched field coming in and was kind of that way at the wire. I will say it didn't look like a race that was going to have a ton of pace on it, but it wound up being pretty quick early with Grand Sonata and Public Sector both going out and kind of really laying it down. And you could say they set it up for a horse like Running B. Fort Washington, he came in with some very darkened form, but I think you could get there if I look back at his PPs. I certainly didn't see it before the race, but he had some races to run back to. He rounded up with a 122 TimeformUS speed figure, Running B a 123 because he was up closer to that pretty fast pace early on. So solid effort, but this was a grade 3 in name, and I would say that's probably what it is going out to.
Yeah, Craig, obviously I echo your sentiments about the pick 5 wager. I mean, you would think it's just a coding fix or being able to transmit a little more data between the racetrack and the tote company. I mean, when there's a dead heat and a superfecta, I think they're able to pay out multiple payouts. So I don't know why it has to be different for a pick 5 wager. I guess it's the same for pick 4 as well. I obviously didn't research that. But yeah, it's not fair to the bettors. I mean, that's the worst feeling when you feel like you had a 35 to 1 shot win as part of the sequence and you get saddled with all of the people that were on the 9 to 2 shot that shares the victory with you and your payout is just reduced exponentially. That's really unfortunate. And yeah, Fort Washington didn't win the race outright, so you don't deserve the full payout, but you deserve a lot more than what you got if you hit that wager. So it's just an unfortunate thing, and it should be fixable. And it's just one of those things that there probably isn't enough focus on. There's not enough pressure to fix it. But I know some people were upset by this situation. So hopefully there's better down the road with as far as these wagers are go. But like with a lot of things in racing, Craig, I don't think either of us have a whole lot of hope on that front. As for the performances of Fort Washington and Running B, yeah, Craig, I agree with you. There was some pace in this race. I think the thing with Fort Washington that you had to like was that he broke much better in this race than he has in a lot of his recent starts. He's a horse that had a history of really taking him out of the race, to himself out of the race early, and he was just always more engaged this day than he had been in his recent races, and that put him in position to earn this victory. Good training job by Shug McGahee, who has had this horse for a while through a couple different ownerships, I think, and didn't perform well coming off the layoff back in May, but obviously that was just the tightener. Ran better here. And Running B, another solid performance from him. He was really game trying to battle back between horses. Maybe one of the better performances was actually that third place finisher, Tawny Port, who made an early move down the backstretch to push the pace and was still fighting on between horses at the end. I think he only lost this race by a neck. So good efforts from the top 3, Craig. Probably still a cut below the best turf runners that are in this division, but it was an exciting race to watch.
Yeah, I'd actually like to see Tawny Port get some more shots at shorter distances. Somehow he got cast into being this marathon specialist, and I'm not sure he really is. Yeah, he won the John's Call at Saratoga against not the strongest field, but he showed he can compete at these shorter distances.
The ninth race on this card was the Grade 3 Eatontown for the fillies and mares, going the mile and 16th distance, and a very different kind of pace scenario than the Monmouth Stakes, that one having red color-coded pace figures, this one obviously having blue color-coded pace figures, but still a similar race flow, Craig, as this race was another one that sort of fell apart despite the pace situation, and I think that's something that's interesting to pay attention to, especially in turf races, where sometimes it's not the benefit that the fractions might suggest it is to be leading when the entire field is bunched through the early portions of the race. And I think it also is a comment on how the Monmouth turf course might have been playing on this Saturday card, Craig, because even though it was rated firm, there had been some rain in the area Friday into Saturday, and it's only rated a 7 out of 10 on the track condition rating scale. So it didn't seem like it was a course that was necessarily carrying speed.
Yeah, I would say this was more a good course than a firm for sure. Not to the yielding level, but definitely had some give in it. And these are the kind of races, that make me pull the little bit of hair that I have left out at times when I see a horse like Spirit and Glory, who I think has a big pace advantage on the field. And I played her pretty heavily in the pick 5. And she sets a opening quarter pace figure of 69, and we've just seen it over and over again. It's just the kind of thing that just leaves the closers in the race, and she's never going to be able to outkick those horses when she doesn't make them work early, and that's what happened here, in my opinion. Maybe she wouldn't have won anyway. I mean, she got beat by a length and a half in here, but I just hate these kind of rides, and I don't know how that became so prevalent in this game. It's also the pace was so slow. As you look at the chart, you can see that both the top two, because they were in the back of the pack early, or at least towards the back, they got really big pace upgrades as compared to everybody else who basically got close to their speed figures, just a little bit of upgrade. It's one that I almost say maybe the algorithms being a little too friendly to the two horses that came from behind. It's something that we constantly tinker with, and I'll be revisiting. This is on my list of races to kind of keep an eye on and see any adjustments. How would it affect this one? Because I don't know that the top two are really 124 type TimeformUS horses.
Yeah, Craig, I was going to say the exact same thing. When the turf course is just a little tiring in general, and it's sort of favoring horses making those late moves, which I don't think is set in stone, but it kind of felt like that from the races that I watched on the turf at Monmouth on Saturday. It may be a little bit too much of an upgrade, just given that these horses may not be as compromised as the raw pace figures might suggest. So I would kind of take those with a grain of salt next time, those numbers for tax implications and Mom and June, probably especially so for the winner, Craig, because she wasn't that far back early. And I think, this is something we talked about when we were handicapping the race last weekend. I'm not going to totally abandon this notion that I still would like to see tax implications get some shots in shorter races. And I think we actually saw that come through here, because she's a horse that does appear to have a really strong sprint finish. And I think the fact that this race was run so slowly through the early stages, it didn't sap her stamina or take away from that sprint as much as it might in a more legitimately run race. So I think that actually might have given her the advantage in the end, even though she was closing from mid-pack in here. Good effort by Mom and June, though. I don't want to take anything away from her, because she did have a lot of ground to make up, and she still was able to get within 3/4 of a length of the winner, Craig. And while I agree with you on Spirit and Glory, it's not always a benefit to go so slowly on the front end. I still thought she was kind of bad in this race, because she has shown a good sprint finish in the past, and she just couldn't ever get away from these horses. And to me, Craig, it was a little bit of a red flag that she went off at 7-2 in this race, because especially after the scratches of all the other speed, didn't she kind of look like a 7-5 shot on paper? And it was a little weird that she was so cold on the board.
Yeah, I agree with that part of it for sure. She was definitely kind of cold on the board. And yeah, I don't want to give the impression that I think she was going to win, even if she set a faster pace. But I just hate these kind of rides. And to your point, for the as far as it being a good course, something we do when we make these figures is we do look at the track condition, and probably a mistake. And that what is on my list to fix is, instead of using the official track condition, which is what I'm doing, I need to use that rating, that TimeformUS rating, and that would probably change that adjustment some.
One other horse I wanted to mention as we move on from this race, Craig, was the number 1 Sacred Wish. When we were showing that replay, you might have noticed that she never really had a clear path in the stretch. It seemed like Kendrick Carmouche first tried to get off the rail, then he went back to the rail, and when you're trying to sprint through the last quarter and you're having to pause while altering course a couple of times, that's never an ideal situation. She did save all the ground and got a good trip up until the quarter pole, but I just think given her journey through the stretch, she was never going to get there. So she's one that I could maybe give another shot to next time. I guess I'm not going to hold this race against her is the way that I'll put it. I don't know how much I'd want to upgrade her off this performance, but I just don't think that the trip really worked out for her on this day.
Yeah, that's a good point because she was a 4-year-old who I thought was probably going to improve, and she very well may have without the trip that she had. So, yeah, I agree with you. I would give her another shot.
Let's move on to a Monmouth Stakes from Sunday. This was the Get Serious Stakes going 5 furlongs on the turf, and the turf had obviously dried out quite a bit by Sunday as the course was playing a little faster here. And a slight upset, Craig, as Groom's All Business was able to get the job done over the very speedy Super Quest, who seemed like the 5 furlongs might be right up his alley, but not so with Groom's All Business in the race because this horse is in great form right now. I think he returned as a new gelding this year as a 5-year-old, and really seems to have just put him up to the next level.
Yeah, he did come back as a new gelding in 2024, and he's now 2 for 2 with 2 pretty easy wins so far. So he clearly is a horse who's looking to, he's really good. I mean, I think he could run in better races than what we're seeing here. I think his first race at was at Gulfstream Park. No, it wasn't. Where was that one? It was at Pimlico. And that was over that really boggy course. So, that's one you kind of take with a grain of salt. But he proved here that was no fluke. He got a 120 TimeformUS speed figure for the win. So just a really good effort. And I'm pretty excited to see this horse and maybe against some better horses. Don't know how far he wants to go. Maybe 5.5 is his limit, but he's run okay at 6 even before. So he's one who has some potential.
Yeah, you might remember he was actually entered in the Grade 1 Jaipur, somewhat controversially got left on the also eligible list, despite the fact that he was coming in off a victory on that Pimlico week card for the Preakness, but didn't get in that day. Maybe in retrospect, a blessing in disguise, because even if he had gotten in, he would have been saddled in post 12. Here, he was able to get an inside trip and a great ride from Fernando Hara, who took full advantage from that inside post to just save ground every step of the way. And you could see as soon as he popped outside of Super Quest at the top of the stretch, he was going to be able to reel that horse in and just swallowed him up really within an instant. Groom's All Business does possess a pretty strong turn of foot, and just a horse that's really in nice form right now for trainer Jorge Duarte. Let's move on to Belmont at the Big A, and we'll talk about that race that was part of the cross-country Pick 5 sequence, the feature race, the Grade 2 Bed of Roses. And Craig, an exciting race to watch. There was a lot going on in here from a trip standpoint. Good call by you on the winner, a seed for trainer Chad Brown. Maybe didn't get the best price with Irad Ortiz riding, but I think you kind of expect that going in, or you at least have to, playing in New York races. But Irad really did make the difference in this situation, Craig, because he just gave this filly a perfect ride.
He did. I mean, yes, I liked her and picked her on the forecast, but I wouldn't even argue that she necessarily ran the best race in here. I thought she ran fine, but yeah, hats off to Irad Ortiz because he gave her a perfect trip. And I think I mentioned that as well, that from that inside post that, I thought she would get a good trip, and that's exactly what happened. This was a race that was a little bit tough to make the speed figure for. Don't remember off the top of my head exactly why I gave the breakout, whether it would have been much faster or much slower. I think in this case, it would have been much slower, and I just didn't believe those times. And it's one that I'll track going forward, but I'm pretty happy with the number. All the horses ran pretty much what they've been running, but yeah, there were some others. If you wanted to tell me that Just Catherine was the best, I certainly wouldn't argue with you, and I'd probably even agree with you.
Yeah, Craig, I think I would like to tell you that Just Catherine was the best horse. And I'll show the head out of the start right after this to see exactly what happened to her. But you could see Just Catherine is the one closing on the outside of Exceed. And Exceed was able to hold her off, but Just Catherine covered more ground, had trouble at the start. Thought it was also a good effort from third place finisher Hot Fudge in this race, Craig. It was a little frustrating for me. I mean, I did fine on this race, but the two horses I liked were Just Catherine and Hot Fudge, who went off at crazy prices, 16 to 1 and 25 to 1. And, to get beat by what I thought was an overbet Chad Brown Irad horse was a little bit annoying, but they do win a lot of races for a reason. Chad Brown, one of the best trainers in the sport, and Irad Ortiz, when he's able to deliver rides like this in races where other horses have trouble, he is pretty tough to beat. As for the speed figure, Craig, yeah, I was kind of curious what you would do with this one because the final time did seem a little slow compared to how fast the track was playing this day. And you can kind of see it looking at the TimeformUS chart here. This Bed of Roses was just had turf races around it. The late pick 4 was 3 turf races and then this one dirt race. So it was sort of isolated from the other dirt races on the card, which mostly took place earlier. It did feel to me like the dirt course really sped up in the middle of the day and might have slowed down for this race. And I'm guessing you kind of came to that same conclusion, giving this race the breakout notation. Because if you gave this race any lower of a number than a 110, just everybody would have been regressing. And given how competitive this race came up and how bunched the field was at the wire, I think that's a little hard to buy. So I think you made the right call for this one. And let me just show that head-on of this Bed of Roses as we continue to talk about it. You could argue that if they looked at starts, maybe there should have been an inquiry here because Exceed is actually the one that causes all the problems for Just Catherine. You could see it right there. She just takes a right turn coming out of the starting gate and fouls her as well as Morning Matcha, the number 4 in this race, who really took the worst of it at the start and actually ran pretty well in here. If you want to watch my Horses to Watch segment, which I'll be filming a little bit later today, I might have something on this race. But definitely trips to discuss in here, Craig. The winner got the job done, but I think you could argue from a few different directions that she maybe wasn't the best horse.
Yeah, this was the day to have her. I wouldn't want her going forward. And you make a good point about the starts, but they really don't look at starts. And I honestly don't know where I stand on that because if we looked at all the races, I mean, you could have 100 DQs a month. So it's probably the right way to go, but it can certainly be frustrating at times.
Yeah, if that's the opinion of the stewards that anything goes at the start, maybe I disagree with it, but at least it's consistent. That's okay. I don't like when, maybe something seems egregious or it gets more attention or there's a claim of foul and suddenly we're looking at the starts in one situation whereas we wouldn't in others and making a change. I don't think there's been too much of that recently in New York. You could have other gripes with the stewards, but I think you can't deny that pretty consistently they don't adjudicate infractions at the start. So not surprised they didn't look at this. Maybe I could argue that Just Catherine would have won without that trouble or the wide trip, but don't want to harp on that too much, Greg, because at some point you do have to turn the page. Another Saturday race that we have to talk about was a maiden special weight event for the 2-year-olds, Craig. And I would imagine that this 7th race on the card is one of the fastest speed figures that we've given to a 2-year-old so far in 2024, as these 2 runners that hit the wire together, Mentee and Colloquial, put on quite a show. And I think these are a couple of juveniles that we could be pretty excited about.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I didn't look it up, but I think this is the fastest 2-year-old figure I've seen so far. A 108 for Mentee. And as you note, it's not like he did it all by himself. Colloquial was certainly flying at the end, and I actually thought he was going to get there for a bit. So pretty good race. And there was a runner in here, My Matoli, who had run already at Aqueduct and run pretty well. So it's not like this was a complete unknown race. I thought the top 2 were really good, and I look forward to seeing both of them going forward. A lot of times, people will just assume Colloquial would be the better horse stretching out, but I'm not one who necessarily wants to go that way. Mentee was going pretty quick early for a 2-year-old. Did just hold on. I think they're both really good, and I hope we see them meet up again in the future.
Yeah, Mentee is obviously the younger full brother to Fierceness, who himself was very impressive on debut during his 2-year-old season. And Mentee did get the job done here, only just over Colloquial, as you could see in the stretch here. Colloquial, who had been inside and taking some kickback on the far turn, as soon as he got to the outside, this horse really lengthened his stride. And as Craig said, he almost gets there as they come onto the wire. Was getting a bob just after the finish line, getting in front of Mentee. And it did kind of feel watching the race, Craig, like Mentee kind of shortened stride a little bit at the very end. It wasn't just Colloquial picking up the pace. The winner was coming back to the field, but as you were noted, he did have to be used on the backstretch to get clear of this field early and did open up on the far turn. They were moving up front. They were moving for the entire race to finish up in 56-4. And that 108 Timeform US speed figure points this horse out as one that could make some noise in the graded stakes that we're going to see next month at Saratoga. Obviously, Mentee, well-bred, Craig, but Colloquial, he is by first crop sire Vekoma, and I think it's been the talk of the past couple of weeks that the Vekomas that have hit the track are runners. I think we've seen now 10 horses, progeny of him debut. 6 of them have won. Almost 7 for 10 if Colloquial had won the bob of this race. That is quite a start to a first crop for a sire. Probably not a big surprise because Vekoma was a precocious type himself, and he's certainly having that early season success with his youngsters.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because I was going to ask about that. And he's obviously been incredible so far. And if I notice, then a lot of people are noticing because I'm not one that pays a lot of attention to first crop sires. But he was a horse I was a fan of on the racetrack. He's certainly bred to be a good one. And hopefully he keeps passing that on. Because, yeah, we need as many good sires as we can get. And he certainly looks like he's going to be one.
Yeah, unfortunately, most of the progeny that I've seen from him don't have that egg beater action to the legs like he did. He was not one of the prettiest movers. I'm always amused by the stallion ads for Vekoma when they show his victories. It's always right at the finish, so you're getting that 90-degree view of him, and you're not seeing him head on because I don't think that would make you want to breed to a horse who's moving like that. But Colloquial definitely had a prettier action than his sire did. Craig, I'm going to throw a little bit of a curveball at you, and as we're talking about these races, I kind of remembering that there is a 2-year-old race from Friday at Belmont at the Big A that I just briefly want to mention, and I know it got a decent speed figure. That is the debut of Complexion, who is a 2-year-old filly. This was the female division of the race on Saturday. This filly, a first-time starter for Danny Gargan, and a 98 Timeform US speed figure, not quite as high as what Mentee got on Saturday, but still a solid number, Craig. And this filly is the younger half brother to Jack Christopher. And as I throw up the replay, you're going to see she looks a lot like that older brother.
Yeah. And she also, I should note, her final time figure was a 101. She didn't quite make my cutoff when I threw the rundown together because she didn't hit triple digits. But had I used the final time, she would have. And yes, she couldn't have been much more impressive in this spot, winning off by over half a dozen lengths. So definitely one to watch going forward.
Yeah, and it's a race that featured a much slower early pace than what was set by the males and by Mentee on the next day. 23-1 to the quarter is pretty slow for a 5 furlong race at Aqueduct. And I think there even is a blue color coded pace figure in the chart for this race, but you had to like what she did when she was finally set down at the 8th pole. She finished up this race strongly. That's why the final time number is a little bit faster. So she feels like another one that could be heard from in stakes races down the line. Let's move on to Santa Anita. We're going to discuss their future race there from the Sunday card. The stamina test for the older runners to go on the downhill course, the San Juan Capistrano Grade 3 event. And Craig, we've got a real specialist going this distance in SoCal. That is Planetario, winning the San Juan Capistrano for the second year in a row.
Yeah, he certainly loved the further the better, it seems, with him. He's super consistent horse. He kind of runs the same Timeform US speed figures every time out. He got a 117 for this effort, and I was pretty impressed by this one because it didn't look like he was going to get there to me as I was watching, and he was just game to the wire, really dug in and was able to run down that old stalwart Rock Emperor who we've seen many times over the past. And he ran fine. He ran one of his better races, Rock Emperor, at least of late, and it still wasn't good enough. So fun race for Planetario. He's not going to get many chances to run this distance. We don't see a lot of 1 3/4, particularly on the turf, but when he gets it, he's good.
Yeah, I think this might have been a slightly better race than even the speed figure suggests, because you could see coming around the far turn here, I mean, he is getting a very confident ride from Hector Berrios, not even asking yet, just waiting, knowing that he's got the stamina to finish off this race and the kick when it's going to be called for. And I think he was almost a little caught off guard by how much Rock Emperor still had in the tank right here. And when they push the button on Rock Emperor, he opens up a couple lengths on that rival, and he really quickly has to go to work on Planetario and produce that sprint finish to run him down. And he is just able to get that horse as they come onto the wire. Nice to see horses really finishing strongly, going this 1 3/4 or about 1 3/4 distance on the turf. He's a good one, Craig. Obviously, a specialist going this far. Not sure it means a whole lot for this turf marathon division at large. I think we've talked about it quite a bit, that the horses competing in these races in Southern California aren't necessarily the cream of the crop based on what's out there, but he definitely does want to run as far as they write races. Another race from Sunday that we want to mention that took place on the turf, though at a much shorter distance, was the first race of the day, an allowance event, and a high-level allowance at that, as there were plenty of stakes and graded stakes quality runners that were in this field, such as Unconquerable Keen, First Piece, Motorious, Turn on the Jets. Motorious, I think he was one of the shorter prices in the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint at the end of last year, Craig, but it was an upset, as Mana Rose has been on quite the win streak recently and doesn't seem like it matters whether it's turf or dirt. He just keeps winning.
Yeah, I feel like we maybe talked about his last race. I can't remember for sure, but he is just dominating of late, just winning by open lengths. It doesn't matter if it's turd or turf, or dirt or turf. And he switched back to the turf here, and it just didn't seem to make any difference. He's just in top form. He was able to even rate a little bit off this one, as he did last time on dirt. So it's not like he's some need to lead type. He is able to sit off a little bit and still finish up. So he wound up with a 119 TimeformUS speed figure on the turf, 120 final time. So this horse is just in raging form right now, and he's a warrior too. I mean, he just keeps running. He runs plenty, and I assume we're going to see him again soon.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, he rated a little bit in this spot. You could see he backed off around the far turn in this race and actually allowed Unconquerable Keen to open up about 3 lengths on him. And he comes up, reels that rival in, and still produces a turn of foot in the late stages, because he wasn't just running fast at the start of this race. He was really finishing at the end. And I think this was actually a race that had some rising pace figures in the end of this race. And we'll take a look at it as we finish up this replay. But you could see he is really striding out beautifully to the wire. Some of the rivals behind him, maybe not on their game for this race, Craig. I don't think we saw the best of Motorious in this race. You might be able to say the same thing about First Piece, but still, take nothing away from Mana Rose. He has been running those speed figures, coming right up to that 120 mark for about 4 starts in a row right now. He is a Calbred, and I kind of wonder if maybe next time they'll be thinking about taking on a horse like the Chosen Vron, wherever he shows up, because this could be a new Calbred rival for that horse that is compiling a win streak of his own.
Yeah, that would be quite the interesting race. I would probably pay admission to see that one. So that would be fun for sure. And we've seen the Chosen Vron. He's only really run fast one time of late, because he normally doesn't have to. But if he ran against this guy, he would definitely have to kick it up a notch.
Let's mention one more race from Southern California this past week. That was earlier on the Rare Thursday card at Santa Anita, the 6th race of the day. Bob Baffert, or actually I think it was the 8th race, I'm sorry. Bob Baffert unveiled a 2-year-old filly named Noonie. Actually having trouble finding this race. I'll get to it in a second. I think I clicked on Friday instead of Thursday. But I'll just speak through this one. $1.8 million purchase, Craig, at the OBS March sale off a 20 1/5 workout. Frankly, I didn't know 2-year-olds could work that fast at these 2-year-old sales, but the workout times just seem to keep getting faster. She did what she was supposed to do on debut at the price that she went off.
Yeah, I mean, that's about all you could say. I mean, it's hard to say what was in behind her because we don't know. They were all first-time starters. The speed figure wasn't the easiest to make, I'm sure. My assistant does that one, but a good effort. You got 100 TimeformUS speed figure. I mean, it was a little bit faster than Complexion, who we talked about at the Belmont at the Big A for Danny Gargan. But yeah, who knows? I'm sure she's a good filly for Bob Baffert, and I imagine she will take a step up in class going forward as she moves into the stakes company. But yeah, it's just hard to know what was in behind her, and we'll see. It's a race worth tracking, because if she's really good, maybe the others in behind her will have an excuse, but she certainly showed some talent.
Yeah, she definitely did. This was a nice performance by her. Big speed figure, like you said, I mean, slow pace, horse that just broke on top of this field, was obviously ready to go first time. Interesting pedigree on this one, being from the first crop of Win, who some people might remember as that Grade 1 Forgo winner for the race run in the monsoon. I think that was about 5 years ago at this point. Win, a sire that doesn't have the sexiest pedigree. He's by Hat Trick, and being a son of Hat Trick, I think he's one of the rare horses from that Sunday Silence sire line that's standing in the U.S. So obviously has a fast one here. We'll see what kind of sire he does turn out to be. Let's move on to Churchill Downs, and we'll mention the feature race there from their Saturday card. That was the 7th race of the day, the Chorleywood. I think this is a relatively new stakes race that they're running at Churchill, Craig, going the 11 furlong distance. And it's a new trip for the winner, Webslinger, who stretched out. I think the furthest he'd ever gone in his career up until this point was 1.25 miles, but always seemed like a horse that wasn't going to have trouble stretching out a little bit further. And I think he proved that to be the case here, getting the job done, but benefiting from a race that did feature a little bit of pace up front.
Yeah, I was happy to see him. I mean, he's a horse who I've divorced. I refuse to ever go back to him, but luckily I wasn't playing this card, so I didn't get beat here. But, I mean, he kind of towered over this field going in on class, and even his speed figures were better than most. And it was just a question if he could handle the distance. He was able to handle it just fine. As you said, all the fractions are coded in red here, so he certainly got some pace to close into. Me personally, I'm not going to take this as a sign that he's found a new lease on life as a turf marathoner and he can jump right back in the top class. I just think it was a pretty weak field he was able to handle. Bold Act was in here, the Charlie Appleby horse, but I've seen enough of him to know he's not really one of his top horses.
Well, Craig, maybe it opens up some other options for Webslinger, because I think we've seen that Webslinger just struggles a little bit against some of the very best turf horses in the country at those 1.125 1.25 distances. I mean, we've seen him try those races on a number of occasions, and while he always runs well and arguably runs the best race sometimes when you're taking trips into account, he just always seems to fall a little bit short against that level of competition. And if you're able to handle these 3-turn marathons, 1 3/8, 1.5 miles, maybe that opens up the option of a race like the Sword Dancer at Saratoga, Grade 1 during the summer, where you're probably not going to find the likes of Program Trading or Nation's Pride or Measured Time, who just won the Manhattan. Maybe Charlie Appleby's going to have some new face that handles the marathon distance that comes in for that race. But at least at this point in time, it seems like those middle distance horses that want the 1.25 miles might not be stretching out to those 1.5 mile races until, per se, a race like the Breeders' Cup. So maybe there's an opportunity for Webslinger to find a new niche between now and then. We'll see if that's the case. I agree with you, though, Craig. He was beating a slightly weaker field here. Segoy, I thought, was game to finish second, given how the pace set up in this race. Got a little more pressure than he did in his prior start. The Louisville and Bold Act, we've seen him be his own worst enemy on some prior occasions. In this race, I actually thought he settled better than he had in prior starts, with Tyler Gaffalione taking over the reins this time, but still just could not produce a finish that matched that of Webslinger. Other stakes race on Saturday at Churchill Downs was the 5th race on the card, that the Monomoy Girl going the 1.16 distance on the turf on the dirt for the 3-year-old fillies. And Our Pretty Woman, Craig, one of the few horses that seemed like just didn't really handle that sloppy track on Kentucky Oaks Day, running in that major Grade 1 for the first Friday in May. Appreciated the class relief here, getting back against some softer company and also probably back on a fast track.
Yeah, we talked about that Kentucky Oaks. It was one I think for a lot of horses you could put a line through. Just the field was totally gapped out. Obviously, not taking anything away from the winner, Torpedo Anna, who came back to reaffirm that form in the Acorn. But there were some horses who just didn't handle the track, and I think Our Pretty Woman was one of them. She ran right back to her Fairgrounds Oaks here, getting a 110 TimeformUS speed figure. So not a race I'm going to get overly excited about. I mean, the horse she beat, Intricate, was one who was considered an Oaks contender earlier in the year before kind of falling off in the Fairground Oaks. She came back and ran fine, but I think Our Pretty Woman was probably the best horse. This was a race that featured a really slow pace. We gave it a pretty big pace upgrade, and it's one I'll keep an eye on, but I think it fits with these horses.
Yeah, I agree with the pace upgrade for this race. You can see the P notation in the TimeformUS chart that indicates a race where Craig had to artificially inflate the number a little bit because they just set a pace that was so slow. It prevented these horses from having any chance to run as high speed figure as they normally would. And the number definitely makes sense. The number you gave definitely makes sense for really the top three finishers. And Craig, I thought it was a somewhat encouraging effort from the runner-up Intricate, who was most compromised by that slow pace, racing up the back of the pack early, especially through that opening quarter where they just crawled. I mean, a 63 pace figure in the first quarter, a mile and 16th dirt race at this level is really going slow. So I think Intricate was up against it from that standpoint, but I thought she was really finishing on at the end. And you'll recall, she is the only horse to have ever finished ahead of Torpedo Anna in a race. She's obviously turned out to be a little bit of a disappointment, but I think this was a step in the right direction coming back off the layoff.
Yeah, it definitely was. She ran fine. It's hard numerically, but yeah, I put a number on these races because, I'm pretty much required to, but I don't know how much it means in this spot. I thought visually it was a good effort, particularly when you consider the pace. And, it was basically a match race. I know Band of Gold took some money in here, but that was kind of a filly who had some real question marks. And, it played out that way on paper despite the slow pace.
Let's talk about a couple of other races at venues that we haven't mentioned yet. One of those is a race from Hawthorne. We don't talk about too many races at Hawthorne, but there was a pretty impressive performance there on Sunday as in an odd twist of events. Katie Milady won a race that was just named for her, the Katie Milady. I don't know why that occurred. I was reading the article in the Racing Forum where the trainer of Katie Milady said that even she was a little surprised that they decided to name a race after her horse without even asking her if the horse was going to be retired or not or come back for another season of racing. But they named an appropriate race for her because it was one that Katie Milady was eligible for, and it turned out to be a race that she was very capable of winning.
Yeah, I didn't know if maybe she had been announced as retired and then didn't get retired or what the deal was, but she ran a giant race. She got a 123 TimeformUS speed figure, and only a little bit of that is an upgrade due to the pace algorithm. It was a slow pace that she set, but mostly because of how fast she was able to finish. Her final time figure is a 121 for the race, and the runner-up's a horse that we're all familiar with. We've seen her run often at venues like Keeneland, the Fairgrounds this year. She's a good filly, and she was just no match for Katie and Lady. It was a powerhouse effort. These were Illinois breds, so other than the runner-up, there wasn't a whole lot in behind, but this was a really good race from her and shows she can probably compete in open company. And I mean, she has competed in open company in the past.
Yeah, really impressive effort from her. Did get everything her own way up on the front end, Craig, but still, I mean, to win a turf race by over 7 lengths as she did, that's showing a real dominance. And yeah, as you said, Ouvra is a nice horse, probably not in the best form of her career right now. And I think a 2-turn mile is always going to be stretching Ouvra to the limit. So maybe we didn't see the very best performance out of her, but still, it was a big effort by the winner. And I'm sure they're not going to have too much reason to venture outside of Illinois bred company anytime soon. I mean, she just seems to be dominant in these races. And I mean, I guess the speed figure might entice them to take a look at a race like, I don't know, the Beverly D during the summer if they really wanted to. She'd be a big price in that race, but she definitely is a star of the state bred division in her home state. One more race to mention on this podcast was an allowance race from Laurel, also on Sunday. This is the 7th race of the day there in Maryland. And I think this actually might have been the biggest speed figure of the week, Craig, as Rominski wins this race going 6 furlongs on the dirt, making his first start off the claim for Brittany Russell. Had been a good horse before this, had been in some hot barns before this, but still took a big step forward off the claim for the Russell stable.
Yeah, this was the top figure of the week. I had posted them last night on the X, and I knew it was a fast race. I didn't know it would top the ratings with that 127. Usually not the kind of horse we talk about, but when you get this kind of speed figure, it's kind of hard to ignore. The horse had been in great form, as you said. This was his 4th win in a row. I would imagine he'll probably stick around the Maryland circuit, and he's going to be tough to handle if he can run back to this race. It was one where it wasn't a hard speed figure to make unless you were just afraid to give a big number and cut it back a little bit, because it fit with all the other races. Just a 4-horse field, gapped out a little bit. I just don't know what to make of these kind of horses. I imagine we'll see him in a stake soon in Maryland, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a huge number. Like you, I don't know exactly what to make of it. I mean, we have seen some recent performances from Sir Wellington, who probably is the best horse to use as a measuring stick in this race. He's run some fast numbers recently. He can be a little bit inconsistent, but the 116 that he got for finishing 3rd is certainly not out of line for a horse like him. So the big number makes some sense for Rominski, Craig, and I think we'll get a better line on him next time. He obviously was offered up for a high-priced claiming tag 2 starts back. I think Brittany Russell and the Elkstone Group claimed him for $55,000. He's now won 7 of his last 8 starts. You've got to imagine they're thinking stakes company off this performance, and why not? This dirt sprint division certainly needs more horses that are running speed figures of 125 plus. Obviously, it might be quite a leap to do that at the stakes level after having done it in an allowance race. I mean, one thing is not exactly the same as the other, coming off Lasix and whatnot, different changes in class, but certainly a step in the right direction for a horse that knows how to win races.
Yeah, and the runner-up in here was a horse who's shown some talent. Now, he was coming off a layoff, was what appears to be a first-time gelding. This would have been a very tough speed figure to make if there hadn't been a few other dirt sprints on the card, but there were some before and after, and it fit right in. So I would imagine he'll run in Maryland. That would be my guess. Maybe not. Brittany Russell has been known to ship out, but if it was my horse, I'd want to see him in stakes company a little easier. And then if he runs another win like this, then venture out and see what you have.
Well, that wraps up our recap of last week's racing from around the country, Craig. And we will have our second podcast out this week a little bit later, the TimeformUS Forecast. Obviously, we're recording this Pacecast one day later than usual. Had a slight technical glitch yesterday, but wanted to get this out before these races leave everyone's memory. Are planning to record our forecast on Friday, Craig. I'll be honest, I haven't yet looked at the weekend racing too much. I think they've got a stakes race, the Wild Applause, this weekend at Belmont at the Big A. We'll see how that card comes up. Churchill, whatever else is going on. I still have to take a look at all of that, but we will try to find the best pick 5 sequence to discuss a little bit later this week.
Yeah, if you've looked in no one stakes, you've looked more than I have. I haven't looked at all, but that will be on my resume for today, or my list of things to do today, my agenda.
Well, everybody, thanks for tuning in to the Pacecast this week. Remember, you can always catch these TimeformUS podcasts on DRF.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. Just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Again, thanks for tuning in, and make sure to catch that TimeformUS forecast coming up on Friday.